Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. For the past couple of months, we've been live streaming the Dragon Age series. Currently, we are more than halfway through Dragon Age 2, but we started with Dragon Age Origins. I played this game way back when it first released, but hadn't touched it since then, and it was a great experience diving back into this world. In this video, I'll provide you my thoughts on the first entry in one of gaming's greatest franchises. There's also one major takeaway from this game that I believe isn't clear from just playing it or looking at a review, so be sure to check out that section at the very end. Dragon Age Origins provides an incredible character creation experience, but it does it in a very different way from most games, because the key component is the origins. It starts with choosing your gender, which does impact what romances are available to you, but otherwise doesn't matter. Next, you can choose your race, which is actually a very important decision, but we will get into why later. You can either be a human, elf, or dwarf. All of them have a range of customization options to change hair, eye color, and things of that nature. You can expand the selection using mods, but honestly, at this point, you've probably experienced character creation in games like Baldur's Gate 3 or Dragon's Dogma 2, so what's available here isn't really going to wow you. Next up, you select your class and can choose between warrior, rogue, and mage. All of them provide a completely different experience. All of them have deep, fully fleshed out skill trees, and all of them provide multiple ways to play the class. Warriors can use a sword and shield, or they can stick with two-handed weapons, or they can dual wield weapons. Rogues can dual wield weapons, or you can focus on archery. Each of these playstyles has separate passives and abilities you can utilize in combat. Any playstyle is viable, both from a defensive and damage standpoint, so it's not boring to play with a sword and shield, and you don't automatically get shredded just because you are dual wielding. Mages get schools of magic, which each allow you to focus in different areas, such as elemental damage, debuffing, healing, or a combination of multiple options. There's a ton of different ways to combine all the spells, and honestly, from both a combat and thematic standpoint, Dragon Age provides one of the best interpretations of being a spellcaster that you can find in a game. All of these classes have specializations that either automatically unlock while playing, or you can unlock them by making specific decisions during the game. These specializations add another row of abilities and or passives to your character sheet. Sometimes they don't just make you more powerful, they can allow you to play in a different way, such as Arcane Warrior, which allows you to be a melee mage, or Reaver, which increases your damage as a warrior the lower your health becomes. It's a lot of fun stumbling across different specializations and seeing how they interact with your build. Speaking of builds, during character creation, you also get attribute points and one skill point to spend. You have the typical list of attributes, including strength, dexterity, and constitution, and they all do what you think they do. The cool thing about Origins is you get a ton of attribute points throughout your playthrough, so it's not like some other games where each point has to be carefully placed. There's a long list of skills you can choose from that range from creating poisons to pickpocketing NPCs. I believe all classes get the same amount of skill points, so you don't have to worry about your rogue handling the bulk of skill duties. Also, the skills are not based on your attribute scores, so any character can choose to become effective in a skill regardless of what build you are running. That means characters with very little cunning can still be experts at coercion, and characters with very little dexterity can still be fantastic pickpocketers. Alright, now finally let's get into the biggest decision you make during character creation: your origin. Dragon Age has the best origin system I have ever experienced in a game. There are 6 different origins based on what race and or class you select. Each of them takes about an hour to complete and starts your game in a different part of the map. You'll meet some critical characters and learn more about your culture, or if you choose to be a mage, then you'll learn more about what is expected of you. At some point during the game, you'll circle back to that area and have an opportunity to assist those characters you developed a connection with, or take revenge against those who have wronged you. What makes the origin so effective is that Dragon Age, in my humble opinion, has the best lore in all of gaming, and the origins put it on full display. Dwarves have an entire political system based around status that causes the majority of them to be treated like second-class citizens by their own people. Half of the elven population are enslaved and brutalized by humans, while the other half roams the forest lands, avoiding human contact whenever possible. The culture for both races is fleshed out significantly different from other typical fantasy IPs. Humans, of course, have their own culture within the game, and it's equally alluring. Regardless of which origin you choose, a series of events will occur that force you to leave with a Grey Warden. The Grey Wardens are an organization of people throughout Thedas, which is the continent where the game is located. They are wholly focused on stopping the Darkspawn, which is a race of creatures that have become tainted. Different types of Darkspawn emerge based upon the race of creature who was tainted with Darkspawn blood. Consequently, there's a nice variety of different Darkspawn, and even though you face a ton of them throughout the game, it honestly never felt boring. It helps that from a visual design standpoint, they are terrifying, and in combat, they come off as both ferocious and vicious. Usually, there are only small packs of these creatures on the surface that have to be dealt with, while the vast majority of them search underground for sleeping old gods, which are powerful dragons. Once the Darkspawn find one of the old gods, the creature will awaken and become tainted, turning it into an archdemon. When an archdemon arises, this triggers a blight, causing Darkspawn to rush out from underground and attack cities in force, spreading the taint wherever they go and creating even more Darkspawn. This chaos can only be ended by killing the archdemon, and only Grey Wardens are capable of doing that. Your character is recruited to join the Grey Wardens and assist in fighting against the Blight. Early in the game, you become the leader of Grey Wardens in Ferelden, the country where the game takes place. Consequently, you have a monumental task to save an entire country, but lack any veteran leadership to help you figure out how best to go about that. The only lead you have are 4 treaties that different groups signed with the Grey Wardens, promising that when called upon, they would join the fight against the Blight. This is a fantastic premise that pulls you along the entire game. Origins is completely wide open, so you can resolve the different treaties in whichever order you prefer. The missions to do this are all completely different, connecting you with different characters, and the environments change drastically as well. You'll travel to Elven Forest, human castles, dwarven stone fortresses, and a lot of areas in between. All of the quests are incredibly well written, with deep, fully fleshed out characters and decisions that will oftentimes force you to pause and consider how best to deal with them. A big reason why those quests feel so good is the fantastic world building that Bioware put in place. Ferelden feels alive with a deep, complicated history and a melting pot of organizations and cultures who are oftentimes openly hostile towards each other. In later games, you'll meet characters who mention Ferelden as their home with great affection, and I always feel connected with them. But the world building doesn't stop there, because you also learn a ton of information about places you never visit in the game. Honestly, Origins lays the foundation for Bioware to announce separate games in Orlais, Tevinter, Parvalen, and the Anderfels, and people would buy each one. Since we're on the subject of lore and world building, let's circle back and talk about how mages are handled. To use magic, mages pull power from the Fade, which draws the attention of demons. These demons can speak to the mages and potentially possess them, turning the mage into an abomination who will seek to cause chaos and destruction. For the most part, this process is irreversible, and the mage must be put down. To keep this from happening, mages are housed in giant towers called circles, and protected by Templars who deal with any dangerous spellcasters. I've only scratched the surface of how this system works, and already you can see it's a hell of a lot more involved than what you get in most games. Dragon Age is like that across the board, providing a lot of history and context for why things are the way that they are. Origins has an expansion and several smaller DLCs that also do a great job of making the world feel more alive and stacking additional lore on top of what you already know. The Ultimate Edition gives you all the DLC for free, and it's absolutely well worth having. Everything I mentioned before is great, but undoubtedly the biggest draw for this game is the party members. Origins quite possibly has the best squad in all of gaming. Leliana and Alistair have all remained household names 10 plus years later. Morrigan's reveal was for many people the most epic moment of the recent Veilguard trailer. Part of the reason for this is how diverse and layered all of the party members are. Alistair is noble and funny, but also insecure and immature. Morrigan is cruel and has biting wit, but can still grow to have a deep and powerful affection for you. Zevran is the product of a completely ruthless and savage upbringing, yet he still maintains a joyful outlook and appreciates all he has experienced. All of the party members are like this, possessing distinct personalities that provide a unique look into Dragon Age's world. Even better, all of them have absolutely fantastic banter. No matter which 3 party members you put together, they're going to have conversations that are oftentimes hilarious and insightful. As the game goes on, you'll learn more about these party members, and the banter will oftentimes reflect new developments. It really feels like the entire group is growing together and learning about each other. And the backdrop of all this action is an absolutely knockout soundtrack. It may sound like a small thing, but it must be stated that Origins has the best camp music in all of gaming. It's a very simple, angelic choir track, but when you are listening to party member stories by the campfire, it hits like a Mack truck. The cherry on top of everything I have already told you is that Dragon Age Origins has one of the best endgame series you will ever play through. In the last 5 to 10 hours, there are several revelations and major story beats that trigger an earned emotional response. The last few major battles you encounter are also spectacular. The game has you slowly build up an army that you'll be able to employ during these encounters, and if you have invested in them properly, the results are very satisfying. Origins also has one of the best endings in gaming, providing a post-game section where you can talk with any surviving characters along with a long series of slides detailing how the different locations were impacted by your decisions. Just all the way around, when the closing credits start, you'll feel like it was worth it. For those who are interested, Origins also has some pretty cool mods available. Extra Dog slot allowed me to add the dog into my full party. This is fantastic because in the base game, the dog takes up a slot, and it never feels worth leaving behind another party member. Taking along the dog not only gives you another frontline fighter, but all of the dog's reactivity will still trigger. So I saw many scenes that I had never encountered before, even after playing the game multiple times. I also installed RL's Mabari Madness, which causes dogs to have unique breeds and not only allows you to change your dog's look, but also randomizes dogs throughout the game, giving these enemies significantly more flavor. You also might have noticed that my party members are wearing armor, and in some cases using weapons that weren't in the base game, and that comes from the RL Swan Song mod, which adds a ton of gear that has designs closer to what you would see in Dragon Age 2. I didn't put this equipment on my main character because from what I've heard, it doesn't transfer into the DLCs, and I knew I wanted to play the DLCs. So if you only want to play the main quest, then by all means you can use it on your main character, but otherwise, if you plan to play the Fantastic Awakening expansion or the final DLC Witch Hunt, then I would recommend just sticking with what the base game provides. All that being said, I highly recommend the 3 options that I've outlined. Quick note, if you've been enjoying this video, I plan to drop a lot more Dragon Age content, and I assume you're a fan of the series. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell so that you don't miss any future content. There are 2 aspects of this game that I am neutral on, and the first one is its villain, Terrain Loghain. On the one hand, Loghain is an incredible foe who has very complicated motivations, and honestly, he is someone that is easy to sympathize with. The problem is, in order to see him that way, you have to diligently read the codexes, and even worse, you need to read the prequel book, The Stolen Throne, which details how Ferelden gained its independence. This information significantly helps to flesh out Loghain's character and makes it much easier to see the world from his viewpoint. Without this crucial context, he comes off as a cruel madman who is making a desperate grab at power. I read all the context, and consequently, I love Loghain as a villain, but I know many other people have trouble seeing him as a sympathetic figure. I think Bioware should have done a better job of fleshing out his character for those who just play the game and don't read all the extra information. The other aspect of this game that I am neutral on is how it shows its age. In a lot of ways, Dragon Age Origins remains groundbreaking and fresh, even compared to modern titles. Two areas where that is not the case is in its combat and graphics. Even with mods, the graphics look very old, and frankly, Origins wasn't considered to be a great looking game even when it first came out. This doesn't bother me because while the graphics are mediocre, the art is phenomenal, and much of what you see in Origins is still impressive. Switching over to combat, on the one hand, Dragon Age has one of the best party member tactic systems I've ever seen in a game. It allows you to ensure the team will always use certain actions in certain situations. By the end, my party was a well-oiled machine, doing 90% of what was required in encounters automatically with little need of direct intervention from me. As I already mentioned, there's also a large variety of abilities for you to pick up regardless of your class, and it's a ton of fun watching your builds come to life against powerful opponents. The flip side of this is the combat animations are clunky and most of what you do doesn't really pop. This is especially true in melee combat, where your character has to shuffle into position before being able to strike an enemy. Also, while the game does require you to be tactical, that isn't really necessary during combat. As long as you are careful about putting together the companion's AI tactics, then actual encounters are systematic, and most fights don't require very much thought. Combat is most definitely where Origins shows the most age, and unfortunately, it's also something you do quite a bit throughout the game. Alright, we are finally at the point where I talk about what I didn't like regarding the game. Quick reminder, I do live stream on both YouTube and Twitch, both under Slandered Gaming, so be sure to follow me on both platforms. There are only 3 things I don't like about Dragon Age Origins, but unfortunately, all of them are a big deal. First, let's talk about the issue that probably keeps a lot of you from even trying out this game, the difficulty involved in making it work on modern systems. Frankly, getting this game to work on my computer was a chore. It took me a while to collect enough information to figure out how to do it, and that process was obviously more involved than just about any other game I have played. Thankfully, once I got Origins working, it did run okay for the most part and only crashed on me a handful of times, even though I have heard much worse stories from other players. Next, let's talk about the game's poor side quest design. I am not referring to party member quests because those are fantastic. Dragon Age has a myriad of quests you can perform for different factions. These are usually picked up from a board and require you to talk with or fight a specific person and then report back. All of them are fetch quests with little to no story or dialogue, and there are a ton of them. They stand in stark contrast to the deep storylines you experience in Origins' other content. Even worse, many of these quests are provided at the beginning of the game, but cannot be completed until the end of the game because they require you to visit areas that are unavailable to you. Sometimes you'll also have to backtrack into areas you have already completed just to do a menial task, like drop a letter off with one person. It's a very dissatisfying system, and unfortunately, Fetch Quest is one area where the Dragon Age series only gets worse. The last thing I disliked about this game is that a couple of large areas become genuinely unenjoyable to explore, specifically the deep roads and the Fade. These are both massive sequences with multiple quests that take several hours to finish, and they are hard to enjoy for different reasons. The Fade locks you into an area without your party members for an extended period of time. From a combat perspective, the section isn't especially difficult, but it's laid out in a way that's similar to a puzzle, and you have to use unique mechanics in order to progress. It's infamously terrible, to the point that when I got to this section in my live stream, a significant portion portion of my viewers dropped and made it clear they would not be returning until I finished that area. Yikes! The deep roads are a little bit better in that you aren't locked into that area and you do have access to your party members. Unfortunately, quests there take forever and nearly all of the environments in that area look the same, so it makes the sequence feel like a much bigger drag. Also, unlike the Fade, which switches up a lot of the enemies you face, in the deep roads there's a smaller variety of foes, so it feels like the same fight over and over. I believe the game would have benefited from both areas being reduced. That ends my review of Dragon Age Origins. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave your feedback in the comments below. Also, let me know if there's any additional content you would like to see regarding the game. If it's not already clear, I consider Origins to be a bona fide classic and one of the greatest CRPGs of all time. Incredible origin storylines, great party members, deep skill trees, and fascinating characters throughout your adventure make this game a must-play for any true RPG fans. It does feel bloated in a couple of areas, and getting the game to play nice on modern systems is a pain, but don't let that stop you from enjoying this absolute marvel. Many players wish the other Dragon Age games were like this instead of veering off into what they have become. We'll talk more about that in my Dragon Age 2 review coming as soon as my live stream of the game is finished. Before we drop off, there is one major takeaway regarding this game that I feel like is easy to miss if you're just playing through the game or just looking at a review, and so I kind of wanted to make sure we talked about this separately. In the midst of this conversation regarding companion banter, deep skill trees, and incredible storylines, I do want to make sure that it's clear Solas was right. Solas was right when he put the veil up and imprisoned murderous psychotic mages, freeing the elves from their tyranny in the process. And he's right once again, now that tyranny has risen up and the elves are held in a perpetual state of enslavement, abuse, and torture. Once again, the only one who cares enough that also has the power to right this wrong is Solas. For the elves, there's only one choice, and it is crystal clear. Stand with Solas and tear down the veil. Hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care.